So I decided that they are gonna sweat because of my questions. So it's probably better if we are sitting.
Bring it on.
Okay. So, hi everyone. Hi OpenStack. We are very glad that so many people could attend. This is like an ongoing tradition that we have this panel talk when we ask these sweating questions from people who are involved with the OpenStack Foundation or doing OpenStack in production as like a company. And I try to ask those questions which usually you must be also interested in. And at the very end, you can also participate and ask your questions. I think the whole audience knows these people already. So I kind of compiled a list of questions which would, no? So
I tried to get it from him earlier too, and he said no.
And I was mean and told him that no, you're not gonna get it. So guys, we are here in Budapest. How do you like it so far?
It's gorgeous.
How is it? How do you like the national spirit, our drink, Palinka?
Well, I was lucky enough to have 3 different flavors of it last night, thanks to you. So it was good.
What about you, Thierry?
Yeah, I like the pear one. It's good.
Nah, I took a taxi home early, so I actually missed it. But I think I'm better off today. I'm gonna try it tonight, though, so see what happens.
Yeah, you can't remember it afterwards. That's the problem.
So, but the question is real. So how is Budapest? I mean, from the perspective of OpenStack. Budapest is in Central Eastern Europe. You guys are working on the global market with OpenStack. And the first and very big question is, how do you see, does it even make sense to have an OpenStack conference here, which is like really far away from the valley? Here, the actual DevOps culture is not that developed. Here, the general IT culture is not as developed as it is in the US.
Yeah,
Yep, Mark?
I think absolutely it makes a lot of sense. I think this event is a good proof of that. You know, this has been one of the most consistent OpenStack days anywhere in the world, and I've been fortunate to come to a couple of them. I know Thierry's come to more of them, but I think we actually find that it's actually Silicon Valley in a way that's kind of out of the loop. It seems like in terms of what people are really doing with cloud computing and with OpenStack. There's almost like a bubble there where people are more likely to be disconnected from what's actually happening out in the market, and we see OpenStack adoption in so many places where probably somebody in the Silicon Valley bubble wouldn't even know about, or maybe kind of underestimate what's happening with OpenStack in Europe. But I think this event and this community is proof that it's really important to have that kind of presence here.
No, I agree absolutely, and not only that, it is these types of events which is local. The cool thing about it is it's people flying in to these events as well. We run ourselves OpenStack Days in the Nordics, and we did it first time last year, and we had a great success doing it. And we found the same thing, that it's not only people in Sweden who came; it was the Nordic region that showed up. So this is extremely important, and so whatever you do not stop it. We need it.
Yeah, I also agree that it's a good place to be, but also it's also a critical moment to actually have those events, because we moved from more of a, like in 2010 when we started, it was really Rackspace, NASA, and a few startups down in the valley basically, and we moved from that to like big service providers, and now we're more and more in touch with direct users of the technology. And obviously, as the technology matures, it's easier to for direct users to get involved with OpenStack. And I think getting to meet potential users showing them what you did at City Cloud, or is you can get involved in OpenStack now because it's more user friendly and more. So it's also the right moment, I think, in the life of OpenStack.
Okay, thanks. So from now on, I will just occupy this microphone because I really want to drive this conversation. So please just pass around that one. Daniel, so you are with a Swedish company, so in Europe, which is obviously not the Valley. And what are the challenges if you define yourself or yourselves, I mean the company, as a global competitor? So how do you find it? What are the challenges in this competition if you are not from the US?
Well, first and foremost, it is just that the American companies have they come a long way. We just starting essentially. Even though we started 2009, we're still young in the industry, and whenever you have these big companies who have a massive industry and they have massive amounts of money and they can do whatever they want, of course they're going to be ahead of the curve. But to be honest with you, we see ourselves as a European company with a global reach. And that is really what is the definition and how we separate ourselves from the international company, so to speak. But at the same time, yes, they are competition, but we have to be realistic as well. We're not going to put Google out of business anytime soon. So we're going to have to find ways to work together with Google. We're going to have, or Microsoft or Amazon, whoever it might be, and we're going to have a service which is compelling enough and functioning with the other types of services, so you can have those types of hybrids between us and them. But once again, if you see us as a European company with an international reach, then it makes more sense to say we're just an international company who tries to sell cloud services, because then we just 1 in a million essentially.
But what about the individuals? What does your company make it appealing for an engineer, for example, to work for you instead of just moving to California, moving to Texas, whatever? And,
well, that is truly the hardest bit, to be honest with you, is to finding the right staff and the right people and recruiting people. But we hear that from American companies as well. So it's not only us, but of course it's more appealing to work in the Valley or work for a Google or a Microsoft than it is in a network. We get it. But at the same time, recruiting really good people and knowledgeable people, especially with an OpenStack knowledge in Europe right now, is tough. So that business is really hard, and you have to compete for the people that are available. But as I mentioned before, we have to put a lot more time and effort into educating more people on how this actually works. Not only OpenStack, but cloud services in general, and the development for cloud services. So we can get a broader base to recruit from. But that is by far the toughest bit.
Actually, this is the time when you can hire some beautiful, good engineers from here.
Yeah, I would disagree with like not being in the Valley being a disadvantage, because at this point the market's completely saturated there, and being able to address new geographies is actually one way to reach out to new talent. So I wouldn't like obsess too much about not being in those key centers, because if you are, it's an all-out war versus being able to draw out of the pool of potential talent in Budapest or in Stockholm or others.
Mark, any thoughts on this as the operating officer of the OpenStack Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, as you said, everywhere hiring is difficult. And I think that the reason for that is that every form of cloud computing is growing, public, private, hybrid. They're all growing at very rapid rate, 40, 50% a year. And so that's good news, because it means that all of us who are adopting cloud, they're on the right path, and it's solving a real problem. But it also means that the time it takes to ramp up and educate people who maybe have sysadmin backgrounds but don't understand some of the cloud aspects and stuff, that's always sort of a lag. So from a foundation perspective, one of the things we did invest in the past year is creating a certified OpenStack administrator exam. And so this can help people who get the necessary skills to kind of prove that and get the certification. But I think that, in terms of OpenStack as a community, though, it's extremely distributed. If you look at the OpenStack Technical Committee, which is elected by the contributors to the project, I believe more than half of them are outside of the United States. So the contribution to OpenStack, the participation in it as a community is extremely global. And so I think the hiring challenges aren't necessarily unique to any one region, but it is it's something we need to invest in on the training and sort of certification front. We also have been doing for the past few summits, and in between summits as well, Upstream University. I think
I'm doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So that's a way to help developers who want to understand how to contribute code to OpenStack, because there's certain processes, things you got to set up, different accounts, and so forth. So there's a number of different efforts, but I think that it's ultimately driven by the fact that every form of cloud is growing, which is better than if it's shrinking. But
so you mentioned expanding and growing, but it's also transforming, as you already said in your presentation. You mentioned edge computing and focus on performance like hyperscale, big data, GPU, bare metal, and whatnot. So what's the future of OpenStack in these areas?
Yeah, so I do think that if you think about edge computing, it's really being driven by just this proliferation of cheap sensors that allow us to collect data in every single conceivable corner of the earth. And when you do that, you need to process, store, and move it, and moving it is not really practical. And sometimes you need to transform it and process it sort of closer to the source to get insight out of it. So I think it's one of the most interesting opportunities for OpenStack is to take kind of the traditionally centralized concepts and push them to the edge. So I think that where we are in that now is that a lot of the companies in some of the industries, for example, of course, telecom is a big one, but also retail. We see a lot of the big retailers wanting to have small clouds, in the edge in the store, or we talked about the sort of Starbucks example with Verizon earlier. And then a lot of the industrial kind of use cases to push it into the factory settings or in the field with agriculture. So what we're seeing is that a lot of those companies that are exploring that, they haven't necessarily connected together and had a real collaborative discussion. There are some industry groups, sort of standards groups that are forming around fog and edge computing. And so there's a lot of people looking at it, but I think that where we can do as a community is help bring people together so that we don't end up with 1,000 ways to do edge computing. It's going to be more than one, but 1,000 would be a bad result, I think. So I think OpenStack can help drive that standardization, and as a community, we can help bring the different users together so they can compare notes and say, what are you trying to get out of it? What are we trying to get out of it? And maybe we end up with a series of kind of patterns. And as I was saying this morning, it's going to be OpenStack and a whole bunch of other technologies. There's a lot that goes into a full sort of edge computing scenario. But making sure that we know where OpenStack fits and that it evolves to fit, the use cases is kind of our role in it.
Okay, so you think that the current culture of the OpenStack community is open enough to embrace these kind of other open source technologies too?
Yeah, I think it is, and we've been really making that effort publicly and in private, and in the events that we hold and everything else, for the past couple of years, and I think it's starting to bear fruit. And I think when you think about open infrastructure and things like the machine learning and stuff I talked about earlier, they're sort of arguably they're above the infrastructure layer, but if they're all sort of like cloud tools that rely on each other. We have way more to gain by collaborating across those communities than we do by sort of infighting and setting up, us versus them. And if we don't do that, if we don't seize the opportunity to actually look at the full stack, I've called it like the lamp stack of the cloud. I mean, if we don't take the opportunity to make all those pieces work together, then what will happen is someone like Amazon, who's not necessarily out innovating the market, they're sort of out integrating the market. So a lot of what they're doing is taking open source technology and integrating them tightly together. So if we don't work across those communities, then that's what will happen, is Amazon will run away with it. But I don't think that's going to be the result.
Sure. So actually, Thierry, I want to ask you a similar question. You are the chair of the technical committee. So at one point, any kind of big technical decision would just flow through you. and your team. So we are talking about transformation. On the very technical level, let it be like deployment best practices or programming languages or whatever, what can you see as a challenge for the upcoming future?
So I would correct you by saying that every technical decision climbs to the top. It's
I said every big technical.
right. No, because the technical committee is seen from an external perspective as like the top decision maker, and it is the top decision maker for decisions that actually bubble up to the top. But when you see like new technologies, new project going up, it's more from the bottom. It's more like a group of people that have like-minded problem to solve, and they get together, they get their group together, and at some point they reach out for guidance, and they want to have to know how they could benefit from the OpenStack testing infrastructure or other things, and that's where the technical committee comes in. We don't have that many very difficult technical decisions to take. Like the decisions on simplification is basically something that is not in the DNA of the technical committee, but we have to go into that. So to answer your question more directly, I would say that this simplification effort is I think the most interesting part of what we should be doing now, because if you look at the way OpenStack is built or Open Innovation Project work in general, it's really easy to accept new contributors. You want to have more contributors. You want to have new organizations joining. But all those people and organizations come with their own use cases, their own needs, and so they will push code in a direction that is more expanding in scope. And so the natural inclination of any Open Innovation Project is to grow in the scope of features. And so taking the action, this bottom-up movement will create complexity. And so you have to do top to bottom. The technical committee needs to act to push simplification, like options that are not used, you should remove them. Projects that are not going anywhere or are not really fitting in the picture, we should also not promote them and remove them from the official list of projects, et cetera, et cetera. And those are more difficult decisions because you want to be an open community, you want to empower everyone, but you have to do this. And that's our next challenge.
Or having Python library collisions, you just containerize it. And after like 18 minutes, I think it's a record, we are talking about containers. How can you see, how can from a technical perspective again, how could OpenStack work together with the new buzz, with Kubernetes, Dockerizing everything, and so on and so forth?
Well, I think I covered that in my previous talk. It's really a question of understanding that those are different technologies that serve different needs. And originally, when we started OpenStack, it was like a lot of people wanted to see it as the end of all technologies. So you had to have something that was appealing to application developers, application operators, but also infrastructure providers. And as we evolved, we specialized in more answering the needs of the infrastructure providers. Like we want to provide an open source framework for doing open infrastructure and enable City Cloud or anyone else to be able to take that and bring it to their use case. We mentioned Edge earlier. For that kind of technology, you can't really rely on Amazon or Google. You have to have some kind of an open source framework that you can build your very decentralized solution on top of. You need open source to actually do that. And it's not like a surprise if now we're talking about Edge. It's because it's also the open source technology, the open infrastructure technologies are maturing enough to enable that to actually be a possibility. So yeah, that would be my take. I think once you realize, and I won't like repeat all of my previous talk, once you realize that those are separate technologies, you want to combine them. And we realized that the largest Kubernetes deployments are usually on top of an open infrastructure substrate based on OpenStack. And in the same way, I foresee that most of the OpenStack deployments will use containers and some container orchestration mechanism to actually make life cycle of management of OpenStack itself simpler.
Okay, so Daniel, you are a cloud service provider. So most probably your customers at one point also started to just ask around this new thing, Kubernetes and the Dockerizing everything. What kind of services are you providing to them? Not on the technical level, but like with consulting your customers to leverage these new technologies.
Right. So yeah, it is a hot topic, and it is almost more of a buzzword than they really understand what they're asking for.
Well, OpenStack was more of a buzzword 5 years ago.
Yeah, I know for sure. But especially containers and whatever, they understand, they probably like it and they probably want it, but they really don't know how. And coming back to the education part, that's where it comes in, the consultation of what actually works for you, and if is that specific technology better than this one, and if so, why? In terms of us as a company, we are a true IaaS provider. We are stretching. Sometimes we're working with the customers closer than others, and if we do get the question, yes, we try to just to direct them in the right. We think this is the way you should do things, and then we have partners which we work with who is actually educating people in these types of fields. But at the same time, we just try to make sure that we have the capabilities of hosting the solution that they would like, no matter what they end up with, so to speak. But us as a company right now, we're not educating them in actually the technology more than just trying to point them in the right direction to the right people to talk to. So, but it is a bit confusing. But we hear, well, if you have containers, you don't need infrastructure. But if you need infrastructure, you don't need containers. And if you use that one, I even saw a piece on a paper earlier that you can have your Docker on your laptop, so the infrastructure is gone. So that's good. You don't need clouds at all, just so you know. So it's a bit confusing. But we just try to point them in the right direction to the people who actually knows what they're talking about, like Terry, for instance.
Yeah, so actually this is something what I wanted to ask from Mark, that as you, Daniel, also said, it is confusing. So what is the OpenStack Foundation doing to eliminate this confusion? And well, there are even voices now who just ask, why on earth would we need OpenStack, right? I can just deploy my Kubernetes cluster or Docker cluster with Kubernetes or Mesos on bare metal. So is there still a need for OpenStack, really?
Yeah, I have heard that question. And it's funny because I think that Terry did the most thorough job of explaining kind of why the different pieces exist and will continue to coexist because they solve different problems. But I think it is true that there's kind of this, we're in that hype cycle with containers right now where people, as Terry was saying, you just sort of assume the next technology is going to obliterate all the previous technologies and it's going to solve everything, and it's just kind of a nice fantasy, but it never actually works out that way. I was talking with one of the companies in our ecosystem the other day who does a lot of work in Europe, and he was telling me that he's met with several of their largest customers or prospects in the past few months, and each time they have the same discussion, which is, okay, we hear Kubernetes is hot, let's just run that and run everything on it. And they go through this sort of consultative process and say, okay, well, tell me about all of your apps. And they go through each of the apps, and then at the end they said, well, 0 of them will run in just containerized microservices. Like not a single one of your apps will actually run. Like you actually need OpenStack, and then you can layer Kubernetes on later as you rebuild apps as microservices. So I think it's just a question of hype versus reality. There's nothing wrong with Kubernetes. We love it. We work with the community, but it solves a very different problem. And if you look at the number of apps inside the average data center, many of them need to be in virtual machines. Sometimes they need to be on bare metal. They're certainly not microservices architectures. That's actually the exception rather than the rule. And so if you're building an app from scratch, yeah, you're going to probably want to run it in containers, and you're going to have a distributed architecture. But even when you do that, you're still going to have other apps. And the benefit of having one substrate that's programmable infrastructure that can support both those new apps and all of your older apps and time together on a common network, that's actually what you need to tackle kind of the real world complexity of the data center. And so the kind of bright, shiny object thing works if you're a startup and you're just building one app and you're starting from scratch, but that's a very, very tiny portion of the market.
Okay, so I guess then the main takeaway here is that as an engineer, one should just keep an eye on both the virtual machines and the container as workloads do. Okay, so last question about containers from Thierry. Can you summarize how the Magnum project looks like right now? Because the feeling is that although half of the DevOps world is talking about containers, yet the Magnum project is not an easy thing to integrate in an OpenStack. I guess still in the official install documentation, you can't find anything about Magnum. Is it true? So what are the plans on standardizing it, getting into like a core project in OpenStack?
Well, I think Magnum is better supported than your description, but it's true that it brings a level of complexity with it. Like on the slide I showed about Magnum, you can see that there is heat, and so you basically have to. It's really a great project if you already have Nova and everything below it, and because you can layer that on top of Nova. But if everything you want is like a kind of a cluster container orchestration engine provisioning service, then it's just too much to handle. Like CERN is been having this gigantic Nova architecture forever, and they just laid Magnum on top of it, and it's extremely efficient for their use case, and they are running it at a scale that is defying proportions. But for if all you want to do is really container provisioning container orchestration engine clusters, then that's why I mentioned in my talk the StackCube stuff. Like if all you want to do is a multi-tenant Kubernetes deployment, then why would you go through that? And we also have another use case, which is what if I just want to automate deployment of Kubernetes on top of an OpenStack cloud? And we have large users of OpenStack that are exploring how they can open source a framework to do just that. Like you have an account on AWS or an OpenStack public cloud or an OpenStack private cloud, and how do you simplify the management of just deploying a Kubernetes cluster? And it's a slightly different approach from relying on Magnum to do it. Magnum is more of the public cloud use case. Like you want to give a container Kubernetes as a service to your customers, and you want that those clusters to be like one. You can provision multiple one of them. But in the other case, you want to have this gigantic Kubernetes cluster. You might want to do that more directly rather than have 2 layers of APIs just to provision that thing. So I would say that OpenStack gives you the flexibility and multiple options to get there. I understand that Magnum is not necessarily for everyone. I understand that they need to do more effort in documentation and less effort in feature development. So I expect that now that they've reached, it's actually working well and scales well, they need to get to the next layer, which is make it easy for people to actually deploy it, and maybe remove some of the dependencies they have, maybe simplify a few things. But it's always a cycle where you have to add the features first, then you start hitting users and user pain points in deploying, and then you have to fix that.
Okay, so thank you for the explanation on how is it different than just using like Kubernetes. A slightly different topic. Daniel, again, you are providing service for your customers, so you can't talk the bullshit. You know, it needs to work. It needs to be reliable. So what measures do you take to have that reliable cloud, and how do you find in general the reliability of OpenStack itself?
Let me put it this way: the reliability of OpenStack has improved dramatically over the years, and that is to the positive side. And it also is very depending on how you set it up as well. It's not always OpenStack's fault, to be very fair here. We do our mistakes as well, of course. But as I mentioned before in my talk as well, we interconnect all of our data centers. So the network is the most important thing, that you should never depend on one site. You should always have dependency within a region or a zone, where you even use 2 data centers to have a redundant installation, which is the most important thing. But for our perspective, we can just see that for every version, it gets more stable. It's get a lot easier to upgrade, which also helps, because that is was one of the great costs of downtime for us before. That was the differences between 2 versions could be quite dramatic, and you never really know until you test it how it works. But that also is, I think, by consolidating the project as well, that it becomes more cohesive, and it works better that way. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just add something. One thing we managed to do in OpenStack is to raise an operators community. So it's not just an open source project that produces code, but we also have a lot of best practices sharing between operators of OpenStack. So you said that you made operational choices that were probably not the best ones originally, and you had. But if you knew about those issues beforehand, you could have avoided them. And I think we are seeing more and more of those groups, like public cloud operators, are sharing a lot more than they used to, because they're, like you said in your keynote. It's not a zero-sum game. We need to have more of them. So it's not competition. Actually, it's like we want more competition over. Yeah. So that's great.
Yeah. So I mean, as I mentioned, we started early as well. So we did all the mistakes initially, I guess, and we had to pay for them initially as well. But you learn as you go. And to your point, we know a lot more now than we did a couple of years ago. So of course, everything becomes better just because of that. But at the same time, the functionality for a public cloud is better today than it was when we started as well. So it's a mix of both, I guess.
Sure, and I guess all the engineers here can feel the pain of learning it by doing. So Mark, as Daniel also said, the reliability has improved, which means that it was less reliable to operate on OpenStack Cloud in the past. What's the foundation doing to encourage people to still to try it out and to convince them that it's reliable enough to move their workload onto an OpenStack Cloud instead of, for example, just moving to Amazon?
Yeah. Well, I think that as a foundation, one of the things that we try to do, and this kind of goes to their points about best practices sharing, but is really to try to get as many case studies out as we can and spotlight who the users are in various industries and what they're doing. And I think when you see these companies running at scale, it can provide a certain amount of confidence to people that it's possible, that it can be done. But ultimately, like, the more details we can get them to share, the better, about exactly what configurations they're running, what choices they made with SDN controllers. Like, these are hard decisions that people have to make that impact the reliability and the overall experience once you get into production. And so, those are some of the things we do, is trying to get to know some of these users and what's working for them. In some cases, maybe they don't want to share everything publicly, but they can share it with us in confidence, and we can help kind of feed that back through the feedback loop into the developer community and the operator community in more of an anonymized fashion, to really make sure that we're moving towards something that's accessible to a larger market, because of the ease of use issues are being tackled.
Okay, thank you. So still on the reliability side, Thierry, OpenStack is built up as a mesh of microservices, which basically means that if I jump on the train, I want to provide some service with the OpenStack APIs. I could do it in any programming language if I want. It's just HTTP REST calls, right? So what's the status on the acceptance of using other programming languages for developing certain parts of even the big tent applications?
Yeah, so OpenStack was originally written in Python, and we introduced a number of other programming languages on the fringe, like JavaScript for Horizon, obviously, and shell scripts for DevStack. And so we already had a number of programming languages supported, but At the same time, the reason why we want to focus on a limited number of programming languages is that OpenStack is first and foremost a community, and we're defining a scope of problems we're addressing. We're defining principles that we follow, like open source, open design, open development, open community. We elect all our leadership positions within the OpenStack community, contributing community. So it's what we have in common is what binds us together, and so it's easier to justify, jumping from one project to another if those projects share as much as they can. So not only where we're using only Python for programming the major pieces, but also we would try to share as much code between those projects so that they operate the same way, but also you can jump from one to the other and participate as a community. But at the same time, we also need to be aware of new programming languages and the possibilities they offer, especially in this microservice
context. Like type
context.
safety, which Python is not having there.
Or concurrency, which is the major driver behind Golang. And so what we wanted to have before we move to another programming language is, or accept projects in another programming language, is more lay down this foundation of things that you need to share between the projects that will adopt it. So not just one project going choosing Golang for their writing languages, but what does that mean in terms of infrastructure, in terms of release management, in terms of testing, and what will multiple projects written in Golang in OpenStack would share. And once we defined that, we actually approved Golang as a programming language.
So
now.
You would say that the technical committee is rather open to discuss this kind of issues.
and we're open, and we've been, like I said, we've been adding Golang now. Okay. We just wanted the right questions to be asked before we jump in. Like, it's not just because it's the most convenient language or the language you actually want to write in because it's like trendy and you need to do some Golang, but why would you do that, and what does it mean for the rest of OpenStack? And so we're tackling difficult questions like binary publication now. We used to only produce source code, and in Golang it's kind of a generic thing to ship binaries as well, so that they are ready to be consumed. And what does that mean for release management, which is my pet thing.
Okay, so we are running out of time. So the last round of questions. Actually, I will start with you, Thierry. What's the title of the talk? I think is what's the future of OpenStack. So you as also are working with release management teams. How do you see? Can we still keep this pace of releasing one new version every half a year?
Yeah. So. Usually, when we ask the question of the release cadence, there is half the room that wants to have release more often, and half the room that wants to have release less often. Because the problem is, if you release less often, you don't really remove any of the pain out of the upgrade process, because then you have to swallow 1 full year or 2 years of changes. What we want to enable, though, is the ability to skip a release. Like. You should be able to go from release A to release C without that much constraints. So we actually have a new group that is following the discussion at the forum in Boston, where we had these very open discussions with operators, developers, and users in the room, and we basically lay down the foundation for discussing this. And now there is a work group that is forming that will discuss how exactly we can do that. Is it more of enabling multiple smallish upgrades in sequence, or should we have more of an LTS type setup where you would just jump from one release to the next one? I'm pretty sure we'll
so
keep
still under consideration.
Yeah, we'll keep the 6 months cadence, but then we should enable. Skipping a few upgrades.
So Daniel, really in 1.5 minutes, please answer the question. How do you see you as a service provider, the VM-based workloads versus container-based workloads in the future? When are you guys moving to serverless?
Well, That's a brilliant question. I firmly believe we are still going to have a mix of everything for quite a lot of time to come. It's not going to just be, oh, okay, we're going to stop having any VMs and now it's only containers and then we go VMless and everybody's happy. It doesn't work that way.
Do you see that the transformation already started, that there are more container workloads are coming and so on?
The questions for containers is growing as we speak, and the demand for it is growing, but the transformation has not really started yet. It's very much in the testing stage yet.
Okay. So Mark, you, as someone from the OpenStack Foundation, I would just ask, are we coming back to Budapest next year? Will there be still a buzz around OpenStack so that we should organize a conference like this?
Absolutely. Do you want me to use a minute and a half? No, I would love to come back, and I definitely think that this conference is extremely valuable. And as you were saying earlier, people are traveling from around Europe to be here. And I think it's that's because there's a lot of problems to be solved with OpenStack, and we're going to keep evolving it. And really, we're going to go where the users take us. To Terry's point about the operator community, that they're not only getting engaged in sharing best practice about decisions they made and how they're running it reliably, but also feedback on the future of OpenStack. Where should it go? And that has to be user driven. And I think that's what's so amazing about open source and about communities like this. As a part of that, is that you never really had that ability to influence the software that's strategic to your business in the old proprietary model. If you're lucky, your salesperson would set up a meeting once a year and tell you the roadmap, and you'd say, "I don't like it," and they'd go, "Okay, sorry," and then you just get what you get 2 years later. So I think we're entering a much better, healthier way to build software in open source, where the people that are actually going to use it have a voice in how it gets written. And I also think that we're entering a point where software is more strategic to more businesses than ever. So those two things combined make me very optimistic that OpenStack and this event are going to be even bigger and better next year.
Okay, thank you very much. So actually we ran out of time. We don't really have time for questions from the audience, but I would highly encourage you to just grab these gentlemen on the corridors and ask your questions directly, or even bug Jonathan himself. Thierry, Daniel, Mark, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And as we say in Switzerland, en goede for the lunch. Thank you very much.